Hi, I'm Jack, and these are some of my thoughts on Battleship Potemkin. So, firstly, just my overall thoughts of the film. Of course, the part that stands out the most and the aspect of the movie that is the most memorable is the editing. When you compare the editing in this film to, most movies that came before it, like, for example, Nosferatu, you can tell that a lot more thought went into the editing and with individual cuts and what the filmmaker is trying to convey with how they edit the film. Like for example, Nosferatu has a lot of striking visuals, like the set design and the character design, and it's a lot of the time it's almost the film is sort of just letting those things speak for itself by just putting the camera in a place and just letting the scene play out almost like a play. Wherein Battleship Potemkin, there are just so many cuts, and the editing in it of itself is a driving force in what the film is trying to convey and how the emotions that the audience is feeling. So one of the sequences in the film that I thought had a very effective use of editing was near the beginning of the movie, leading up to where there is the fight that breaks out on the ship. Many of the sailors are brought to the deck, and the commanding officer is preparing to have them killed by a firing squad. And at around 16 minutes and 30 seconds into the film, there is this sequence of shots where we see the soldiers looking up to the mast of the ship, and right after the shot of them looking upwards, it cuts to the mast with bodies hanging from it, and right after that, it cuts to some officers on the ship that are higher ranking, and they are looking up at the same place, which then cuts back to the mast of the exact same shot, except now there are no longer those bodies hanging from it. And it's juxtaposing how the inner psyche of both of these people, where when the two sailors who are about to be killed look up, they are fearful of their life, and they are almost hallucinating that those bodies are there. But these other officers who do not have to fear for their life because they don't have this oppressive force coming down on them, they don't see it. And I thought that was just a very simple but effective use of editing. In this same scene, there's another sequence where the officer commands for the tarp to be put over the sailors that are about to be killed, and there are these cuts. It cuts between this commanding officer who is meant to look very intimidating and scary, and you can see he is touching his sword, and it also keeps cutting to the priest. There's a priest on this ship, and he is repeatedly sort of fidgeting with this cross in his hand, and obviously it's very similar to the way that the officer is touching his sword. And by cutting between these two things and just sort of showing a similarity between them is meant to represent how, of course, like this Orthodox religion and the like militarist state work hand in hand in oppressing these people. And again, I thought that was a very good and simple way of portraying that. Let's see. Both of these sequences would be examples of intellectual montage editing, because for the first one that I mentioned, the shot of these people looking up and then seeing the bodies hanging down. Of course, when you look at those two shots on their own and without the context of the entire sequence, they don't hold much meaning. Or even if you just looked at the soldiers looking up and seeing a body hanging down, you wouldn't you wouldn't get the meaning that the juxtaposition of other people looking up and not seeing the same thing. So that would be an example of intellectual montage. And then the other sequence, of course, is the same thing where, just a priest having a cross in his hand, of course, isn't meaningful on it in and of itself, but when it is interspliced with a officer, acting in a similar way with a weapon, it is able to convey that there's some sort of similarity between those two things. So the book, from pages 76 to 80, in the section called Historical Setting, talks a lot about the context for which these movies were made and how some of these advancements happened. Because in the Soviet Union for a long time, filmmakers were unable to make films because they didn't have the resources necessary. So they spent a lot of time just studying movies from around the world and, cutting them up and reorganizing parts to see what effect they would have on the audience. And in fact, the first ever film school was established in Moscow in 1919. So I just found that to be really interesting how these filmmakers, rather than just, spending their time making movies, which is how you would expect the medium to grow, they instead really took their time, critically thinking about the medium and the techniques they could use to convey certain emotions, right? Like, for example, Kuleshov, he's literally like doing experiments, seeing what techniques he can do to have certain effects on the audience, like the Kuleshov effect, where he isn't just making a movie and seeing how audiences react. He is doing these experiments. And I just found that to be really interesting, how actually, critically thinking and analyzing films rather than just, watching a bunch of them or just making them, you can learn a lot more about it when you really break down the medium and try to see what techniques and other things filmmakers are doing, rather than just passively viewing them. And I just thought that was really interesting and also, pretty relevant to our class. And yeah, so if I had to give Battleship Potemkin the score out of 10, it's hard. I'd say that the historical context, sort of, and everything around the film, in many ways, is a lot more interesting than the film itself. But of course, there still are a lot of good editing techniques and other aspects of the film that I'm able to appreciate, and I still definitely enjoyed watching it and learning about it. So I'd probably give it a 6 out of 10 overall. And yeah, thank you.